Welcome to Let's Chat with Jim Parker, the show that is designed for auto repair businesses and how they can get better at what they do, and they can be better when they go to sell their business. I'm really excited because today we have Tony with Wrenching for Profit with us. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Tony's a consultant in the auto repair business. And Tony, maybe we can start off and you can kind of give the audience a little bit of your background, and then I would love to pick your brain on different things that you see that you think people out there could do a better job of running their shop. So if you can give us a little bit background about yourself, Tony.
Well, I've been in the auto repair business, or started in the auto repair business back in the early 70s. I had always worked with my grandfather and learned how to fix cars, and went to college, not for automotive, but ended up working a second shift at a dealership in the Boston area to bring in extra money for a while. And as things progressed, I turned it into a profession. In 1978, I think it was, I was working for a dealership I'm from Massachusetts, and became an ASE Master Tech. And at the time, didn't seem like such a big deal because it was NAIC at the time, and it was a new thing, if you will. But as it turned out, as the years went on, I was one of the first 250 Master Techs in the country. So just went on learning and progressing to being the best technician fixing cars, until, like anybody with desires and aggression or aggressiveness behavior, decided I can do it better myself. And then, of course, I went into the auto repair business for myself, and learned within the first few years I didn't have a clue other than how to fix a car. So that kind of separates what happens with a lot of shop owners. And now, do you let your ego get in the way and you don't ask for help? Or do you go out of your way to learn as much as you can? And I took the latter route, and ran into, actually, in the early 80s, my first mentor, and probably the most influential person for me as far as learning the business. I didn't need help fixing a car. I needed help how to make money. We had tons of work back then. You didn't have to do anything special than put up auto repair shop. And cars would come in from all over the place, and then you'd fix them. And then at the end of the month and at the end of the week, you always go, geez, seems like I'm working for free. So my goal was to learn how to make money. I was staying in business, but making less money than I made working for a dealership, which didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And so that started the journey into technically learning how to be a businessman, and learning all the things involved, not to be a businessman to run a bank or anything else, but to run automotive repair shops. And so that brought me all the way into owning a multiple of repair shops, until I sold my last one in 2017 and decided at 62 maybe it was time to retire and do something else, which didn't last long.
You've owned like 4 or 5 shops over the years, right?
Yeah, my initial shop was in Massachusetts, and I had that for, I think, 6 or 7 years. Did another thing typical of a lot of auto repair shop owners. Went through a divorce and got clobbered and lost, had to give up the shop. Went to Florida, and after a few months there, decided I had a really good job there for a while. And then I went to a dealership, and I was there 6 years making a ton of money, and decided, well, it's time to go back out and do it again. So then I had a shop in Leesburg, which I sold, luckily. And I say luckily as we get into the show, and we can delve into that a little bit. Yeah. Sold it luckily to make enough money to move to Colorado and start another shop, and use that money from the sale to start that shop. And by then I was starting to actually learn how to run a business. So that was much more easy going, if you will, and opened 2 shops in Colorado, and sold and moved back to Florida and opened another shop. And by then, I know this probably sounds ridiculous, but by then it was easy. I had the formula, not some magical formula, but I had no fears about moving into a new area without any clients per se, and opening a shop and becoming profitable in no time flat. And that's what happened.
Tony, I think what you're saying, your evolution is so important to give the audience, because I think what you see a lot of times is exactly what you said. Somebody's out there and they're a mechanic. They're really, really good at being a mechanic. And they say, hey, I want to open my own shop. And, there is a lot of things on the business side that you need to know. And I think you said something that was really important is put your ego aside. Because the one thing is, I think small business owners, the reason why you go start your own shop is not only you're a good mechanic, but you have confidence in yourself. You have confidence that, like you said, you could do it better than the other person. And I think what I've seen over the years, because I've talked to a lot of, shop owners over the years, the ones that tend to be more successful are the ones that realize they don't know everything and they can learn from other people, and they keep getting better like you did. And I think
I agree.
it's kind of going full circle for you right now, Tony, right?
Yeah, it definitely is.
You seeked out that help, you seeked out that knowledge, and now as a consultant, you're giving that back.
That's a fact. And going back in the early 80s, I had gone to 2 or 3 or 4 seminars on how to make money. And by noontime, I would leave at the break and go, this is ridiculous. I'm not learning anything. They're just equipment people trying to sell equipment. I took from Massachusetts to Mount Kisco, New York. It's a bit of a hike. So I took a 3-hour drive, and I did this seminar with Terry Greenhut. And like a dope, I specialize in transmissions too. So this was a transmission seminar, but on running a business like a dope, I sat there and raised my hand when he said, how many people, such and such, and I raised my hand. And boy, he picked on me unmercifully for 2 hours. But when we had a break for coffee, he come right up to me and said, don't let me get to you. Everybody in here has the same questions. They just didn't have the nerve to raise their hand. He says, if you want to progress, you have to ask questions, you have to take some lumps, and you have to learn. He had such a way. I mean, we're best friends to this day. This is 40-something years later. But the bottom line was, I wasn't content on just going to work every day saying, I fixed 20 cars and went home and went, well, still can't afford that new bike I want or that new boat. So, I mean, you got to learn how to make money. I didn't want to be a millionaire. I never thought being in the auto repair would make me a millionaire, and to be quite factual here, it didn't. But I learned a great living, brought up kids, sent them to school, owned my own. I mean, it did all the things that I was looking for, provided a living that was better than average, in my opinion. And but I would have never got there if I just continued on the road that I knew initially. I tell you, and that's part of the auto industry, that it's evolved. Back when I first opened up, like I was saying, we were always busy. If I didn't like the tone of your voice on the phone, I hung up on you. It was as simple as that. He sounds like a jerk. I ain't got time for him. I'm busy. Well, by the time you got into the mid-'80s, that didn't work anymore. So you have to learn and you have to evolve.
Yeah. And the most successful business owners that I see, the ones that have the best shops that are making the most money, they've seeked out knowledge and knowledge over the years, reached out to people, or they've gone to conferences and they're taking classes, whatever it is, they're listening, they're trying to get better. Yeah. The ones that tend to struggle are the ones that try to isolate themselves. They think they know everything, and it's kind of night and day. And I think that goes back to what I said, is that to go into business for yourself, you have to be very confident in yourself, but at the same time you have to also realize, hey, just because I don't know this and that doesn't mean I can't learn it, and not only learn it, but I can master it and get as best as I possibly can. So why now? You've owned successful shops over the years. Why now? And I want to get nuts and bolts of things here shortly, so we can give some practical advice to the listeners. But real quick, why after years of owning successful businesses, you've stepped out and now you're concentrating just on consulting? Why not start a shop?
I was 62 at the time, and I thought, maybe it's time to go chill out. Enough of fixing cars, enough of taking care of people, because that's what it is. It's about taking care of people, and maybe it's time for me and my wife to chill out. The problem with that is, first of all, I don't know how to chill out. So after about 2 months or so of thinking I had all kinds of stuff to do once I retired, I ran out of everything. And my wife decided, she's younger than me, she decided she didn't want to stop working, so she got a job working for attorneys. And the next thing I know, I'm home alone doing nothing. I mean, I have one side thing that keeps me really busy, but it's not enough to keep me busy like I was used to. And Terry had reached out and said, hey, why don't you take over some of my clients? And so I kind of went in there and I said, well, I don't know what to tell them. He says, of course you do. He says, they're not successful and you need to tell them how to be that. He said, but you just can't beat them over the head with a hammer. You got to convince them that, you're there to help, not to pound on them. I said, okay, well, I might need help with that. I said, but let's do it. And so that kind of got me in there. And as my auto repair career progressed or aged or whatever, I became way more interested in business than fixing cars. I never stopped fixing cars, and I never stopped liking fixing cars or keeping up with what I needed to know. But the business aspect became much more interesting to me. I see this. What do I do? I see that. What do I do? How do we do this? How do we do that? And like when I came back to Florida, by then I felt like I had a formula. I mean, it's not quite as simple as a formula. But again, I've always been confident in everything I've done, be that good or bad, because sometimes it certainly wasn't good. But I had the confidence. I know how to do this. Let's do it one more time. I was just confident that we're going to put everything we learned over the last 3 shops, and just institute it here. Some of the things change. If we're in Florida, and if I were in the villages, I would market through the newspaper. Well, in Colorado, nobody read a newspaper. So you learn new ways of marketing. So again, all those things come into a basket. And when we came back to Florida, we had the formula, and then it was just a matter of sorting out which was truly going to work or not.
So let's dive into things right now. What are some of the biggest things that you see shop owners having that they're not doing properly, or like kind of things that immediately you think that they could fix? Most common problems you're seeing.
For me, most of the shops that I get involved with or get requested to help, they're usually maybe an owner and a counter person and 2, possibly 3 techs, and that the owner's a tech too. And one of the things I do when I walk into a shop and we sit down, and I'll ask them, what do you feel you need to improve on? And generally the first answer is almost always, well, we're not making any money. And then I'll follow that up and I'll ask, well, what's your gross profit? And right off the bat, I mean, I don't have an actual number, but it seems to me 95% of them have no idea what I'm even talking about.
Yeah, right.
And so that sets the groundwork. So first of all, you got to learn about how your shop really works and how the profit structure works. And so it gets to be like that. And I explained to him, I said, look, before you can do all the things you want to do, which I truly believe you can accomplish, you've got to learn how you're making your money. If you don't understand that for every dollar coming in, where it all goes and what you end up with, well, how are you going to do anything else? So it's learning about profit. Parts markup has never changed. I will go into a shop owner and I say, so what are you getting for profit on your parts? Well, I usually mark the parts up 1.5 times. I'm going, why? Oh, that's 50% profit. Well, it's not 50% profit for one thing. And where did you come up with that? And then I teach them about parts matrices. Most of the shops I'm involved with will use a parts matrix, but the goal is a specific profit on every part as a group, as a whole. So at the end of the day, and the same goes with labor. So at the end of the day, you should know within dollars, of course, we did $1,000 today, and 6,500 of it is profit.
So let's touch on that real quick. So what do you feel like the gross profit should be for an auto repair shop? A general auto repair shop.
Yeah, and my goal has always been there's a lot of consultant, there's a lot of theory out there, and it's all valid. But mine is what they would call slightly aggressive, meaning I always chased a 65 to 67% gross profit. Now, I know there's shops out there that are chasing a 70% profit margin. And many times those are like tire stores, but they don't include tire sales in that. So we're talking about brakes and so on. And so just to go back a step, thinking about it, a brake pad that cost you $40 is going to be marked up much more aggressively than a radiator that costs you $125. So that's one reason why they can make that. And the tire stores, again, not bashing, just stating a fact here, generally don't have high quality techs. So the techs aren't eating into that labor rate so much. And so their profit margin's a little higher. But most of the shops I've ever owned were full service, specializing in transmissions, or at least offering that service. And most of the shops I'm involved with, there's only a few today that I'm involved with, but they're full service shops. So they don't really do tires, so we don't have to worry about that. And an oil change is not a profit margin. That's not a profit center. You don't want to lose money on it, but the bottom line is that's a tool to get work in the door to some degree, or a necessity on something that you're doing. But the parts need to be marked up appropriately, and the labor needs to be within the 30% of your labor rate. And at the end of the day, give or take, for anomalies like a really expensive part or a dealership part you had no choice to get that you couldn't get the total markup on, you're going to end up in 65, 67% gross profit. And that was the other thing, explaining gross profit to net profit. Gross profit isn't what you're taking home. That's what you have to pay the bill.
Yeah, so
but we take that as the granted, and they don't.
Let's define real, Tony. I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's define
No.
really quick for what we might mean by gross profit. You're talking with gross profit, you're taking gross sales of the business and you're subtracting out the cost of goods and the labor costs, correct?
Correct. And I've seen a few other different ways, but that's the way right there.
Okay, and then you got the gross profit. That's gross profit. And then net profit is all the expenses after your gross profit. Your rent, utilities, pest control, whatever it is, accounting, advertising, all that stuff. So it's really simple. Gross sales minus cost of goods, labor, equals gross profit, and then take the gross profit from there, all the other expenses subtracted from that equals your.
But breaking down labor for me, and this is where I differ for some of the others, is production labor. That's technicians. I know you have to have a salesperson, a service manager, whatever term, service advisor, whatever you want, but that's not production. So that comes out of
gross sales.
That doesn't. That comes out, the service manager, office people, that all comes out of expenses. Gross profit, the way I've always done it is your techs and your parts. That's it. After that, we get into expensive. Yeah.
That's how we should do it. So going back, gross sales minus the cost of goods and labor, you think it should be about 65, 67%. That's what you're targeting for gross profit. And then, what do you target, for net profit?
Well, net profit now gets a little trickier. Only because depending sometimes how long you've been in business or how you started your business. If you've been in the business 5 years or less, you've got some expenses that may take a while to go away. But you still should be able to net about 6%. But the goal over time is to be in that 20% or more. And then when you can get into that, you can actually get more training if you really have the nerve and get into things that we call peer groups. They call them 20 groups as well, meaning you couldn't get into this group without a 20% net profit margin defined and proven over an 18-month period. And then when you go into that, you learn some more things where they really make you humble because they all take shots at you, but not in a nasty way, into showing where you could do something even better yet. So again, as your business evolves, so should your business acumen, and so should your skin get thicker too. So, but those are the things.
I want to touch base on that peer group situation real quick, Tony, because I'm a big believer in peer groups and a huge believer in peer groups. So your peer group, or the peer groups, you have to have at least a 20% profit margin. So the shop, you're very selective about who's coming in, or it's
absolutely
about who's coming into the peer group. I'm a part of a peer group in my industry. Ours is made up of 12 brokers, and I work with some, in our peer group, we've got 11 business brokers around the country that are at the top of their game, that are extremely knowledgeable. And we get on the phone once a month for an hour and a half, actually a video call once a month for an hour and a half. And we pick each other's brains. We have a confidentiality agreement signed, and we share everything and anything And then once a year we get together in person for 2 or 3 days, where we lock ourselves into a room and we do 2 or 3 days. I'm going to tell you, that's probably, I've been doing that for about 5 years now. That's probably the most impactful thing I've ever done, was that peer group, because you're working with some of the best people out there in their industry. Obviously, mine's for selling businesses and doing M&A work, but I can't talk high. The peer groups are amazing, Tony. I love that.
They are. If you really want to learn and you get into that, then you're right. You think you got it covered, and then you learn, holy cow, there's another layer. And those are the things. It's just like being a tech. I've tried to tell some shop owners that are really decent techs, good techs, and I say, you constantly keep up your training to be a good tech. What makes you think you don't do that for business?
Yep.
And
Exactly.
sometimes
That's a
it's
great
hard.
point. And like you said,
It's
a lot of times, people, they start to shop. They love they love cars. That's what drove them to the industry to begin with. They love cars. They love fixing cars like you do. They find it fascinating, and they're like, I don't business end, profit and loss statement, balance sheet, blah 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 blah, and they're turned off. But like, it's really exciting. It really is. Once you start understanding things and learning the basics, and and tracking things, it's really exciting. I mean, you loved it, ended up loving it more than being a mechanic, and you love being a mechanic. So,
that's a fact. I mean, it got to be towards the end. I used to joke. They say, "Well, you still love fixing cars, and it's great." I'm going, I can't stand cars. I just love the business part of it and taking care of people now. So it transferred. People ask me now, well, if you wanted, how come you don't have a hot rod, or because I just as soon get on my motorcycle and go ride. I've had enough of cars over 50 years, but I'm not dismissing myself from the industry, because I love the industry, and of course the bottom line is you got to fix the cars to be in the industry. So, but it does change. I mean, I think I know 2 or 3 guys that are kind of in the same boat, give it somewhere around the same age as me, and they go, cars, geez, I wish I could just buy something for $1,500 that would work. Of course, there's no such thing out there anymore today. So that's the evolution, I think, going from a mechanic and loving to fix things to finally getting to the point where you love your business and work in your business instead of working in it, more than actual
on your
playing with the
business
cars.
instead of in
Yes,
your business. And I think
right.
I know that. What's that book? The E Myth. Have you read the E Myth?
Maybe in some other term, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
it's a great book called The E Myth, and it's about that exactly, building your business to so you're working on your business instead of in your business. So every day you come in, instead of being caught up on all the day to day stuff, fixing cars, taking invoices, stuff like that. You have your team, you set it up, and you're basically working on the business to make it even better, to make it even more profitable, to give even better service, things like that, instead of being caught up on all the day to day stuff. But Tony, I would love to talk to you about being you're a consultant in the auto repair industry, and maybe you can explain to the audience what your KPIs are, what the big KPIs that you look for. But maybe you can explain what KPIs are, key performance indicators, in case people are listening, they don't know what it is, and then maybe
Well,
explain a
right.
little bit about what you look at as far as KPIs.
Well, I tell you, over the years, the KPI spreadsheet, I mean, I've seen some of them like, holy cow, it's almost like, when do you take your breath? I'm not knocking it, but that wasn't the things I was looking for, always keeping track of. I was always keeping track of a few of the basic things, my labor costs, so they don't get crazy. And one of the things I mentioned, 30% of labor, or 30% of your labor rate, you shouldn't spend any more of that on a tech. So in today's market, a good tech, a really good tech, if you really get a lead tech, he may cost you $50 an hour flat rate. Well, that's going to skew the heck out of your percentage, because if you're charging even $200 an hour, 30%, you just barely making that to cover him. And most independent shops don't have the nerve to charge $200 an hour, even though all the dealerships are charging that. And the song and dance, I listened to everybody going, I can't do that. I can't charge my customer that. Well, then how do you fix their car? Yeah. So for me, the KPI and the labor is always, they'll use that, and I say I mean, the shops I come into, they go, well, I got a really good tech, and he's $45 an hour. Okay, what's your labor rate? 150. Well, something's got to give here because you can't make that much of a difference up in parts. So that's why that's real. That's the number. Labor, it's like anything else. Labor's the killer on everything. Yeah, parts will kill you if you're buying parts and not marking them up and putting in parts you're not even billing out. But the labor gets you faster than anything else because, even if you're paying that man $45 an hour, this is the other part that is hard sometimes to sink in, is that you're also matching his contributions and you're paying Social Security. And, that $45 an hour turns into $52 or $53 an hour in a heartbeat.
Yep.
Come every quarter or every month or whenever you're paying for that stuff. So that the labor is a big one for me. Now I used to, on the shops that had 4 or 5 techs, and we wanted to see how each one was doing. Well, now you can break the labor part down with a KPI tracking their productivity. If the shop has excess cars, meaning every night, one of the reasons I went to this dealership back in I think it was the late 70s, early 80s when I moved to Florida, is because the service manager at the time told me he's got 40 cars left over every night. And for me as a tech who hustled for a living, that means I should never run out of work. So if your shop is in that situation and you're never really running out of work, but you don't seem to be getting it out, well, now following that labor thing and breaking it down into Jim, Bob, Joe, and so on, and figuring out who's doing all the work, and then maybe trying to understand why. So many times a lot of the shops will have some guy, usually a better paid guy, and you'll be shocked to find out he's not really turning as many hours as he should because he's fixing up all the comebacks. Well, okay, that'll show up fairly quickly if you're monitoring your KPIs on a daily or a weekly basis, even if you don't realize that. And a lot of times, even though you may come in with the numbers after 2 weeks and say, hey, just when I went over this, and do you know that so-and-so, he's only turning 22 hours a week. Oh, he's my best guy. Yeah, but you're not letting him do anything because he's constantly messing up, fixing all the other mess ups. So at that point, you got to refigure something out and figure, is one of the other 3 maybe really not fixing anything and not pulling his load, though he's turning 55 hours a week? Either we can straighten him out or you need to replace him. So that's an important one. The parts are just as
the cost. It's not just the cost that you're eating in a situation like that, but it's the reputation of the shop itself.
That's correct. And to me, that's an absolute fact. But a KPI doesn't do anything about reputational issues. It's just pointing out what a lot of times you just won't admit, even though you almost know it yourself. Or why is so-and-so still here? He never does any work. Well, because I like him. Well, what sense does that make? You have a bay and that bay's not producing. Another KPI, and these numbers change now over time. There used to be a theory that every bay should turn $7,500 profit every week. Okay, well, if you're going to go by that, now you can use that along with your other one. These are all different back ways to keep proving a different point. So it depends on what theory you want or how deep you want to go. That labor thing can really break down into a lot of mini categories, if you will. Same thing goes with the parts. It's almost obvious to say that you're going to make more profit on aftermarket parts than you're going to make on dealership parts. However, that's not always true. And who says that's the way it's got to go? So if for some reason you're doing business where you seem to be buying more dealer parts, and you've got to come to the understanding that maybe you need to mark them up like the regular parts because your business dictates those kind of parts. Maybe you're a Euro shop or something. And then the second part of that is, the pushback is always going to be, I can't charge that. Well, you can, but you have to learn how to articulate why your parts cost so much, what the value is of it, and what are they getting in return. So you better have a good warranty, and these are the things that tie in. So even though KPIs have all those things and they're pretty straightforward, they always go off into some other tangent that no spreadsheet's going to tell you that. So you got to be cognizant of all the things that flow into that. So those are the parts and labor truly, and productivity are truly the only things I really ever cared about. But I've seen KPIs for guys selling and things like that. I never really got into that. One and two guy shops. I mean, you can tell by pushing a number on your point of sale system. I don't need to go into some elaborate chart to tell who's selling all the work, but you may want to break it down for some reason. So there's more KPIs available for that too. It just depends on when you go. Me, it was profit on labor, parts, and productivity. That's what I cared about. I didn't use a KPI.
Because that's your three biggest expenses in any business, but your three biggest expenses in a shop is your cost of goods, your labor, and your rent. And your rent's, a fixed expense. It's there all the time. Yeah. So if you got to focus on the labor, it sounds like you're saying focus on the labor first and foremost. Make sure you're charging the appropriate markups on the cost of goods, but focus on that labor. That's what's going to, dictate if you're making money or how much money you're making. And the more you concentrate on that, the better you're going to do. That's a big thing. Yeah.
To put a little side mark to that, I would also use KPIs to a degree on all my marketing too. I mean, I don't believe marketing is all one thing fits all. So usually you have 4 or 5 different kind of streams of marketing, and they should be all going into a funnel, pouring out into the final product of whatever you did that month and so on. Now, KPIs for that obviously would be a little different. How much did I spend? How much did we return back? And there's ways of tracking all that stuff. And then how much did that return piece bring? So then you get an average. I spent X amount of dollars. I got this much in return, and that return was so much per ticket. And you find out, wow, I made $50,000 off a $5,000 marketing piece. One. And after a while, when you do that with all those, and you give it 3 months or 4 months to do its thing, then you can find out, well, this one doesn't work at all. This one's still pretty solid. And then you might find out as you keep doing this over and over time, you're still tracking it. You might find out that the big daddy just isn't cutting it anymore. So then you might want to, so again, that would say to me, maybe the message isn't on point anymore. Maybe we got to change it. That would be the first step. Then after that, if that didn't seem to do anything, then I'm going to cut that. I'm not going to get rid of it because it's still returning. And I might have to put more money into something else. So again, KPIs should be used for marketing too, in my personal opinion, because you don't want to just be saying, oh, I spent X amount of dollars for this marketing and forget about it. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And a lot of guys will do that. A lot of shops will do that. And you'll ask them about marketing, say, oh, yeah, we do this. Well, how's it doing? Oh, okay. Well, that's not an answer.
I hear a lot. I don't know. I want to touch into marketing and advertising because that's always, a big topic with, business owners, the best ways to market and advertising. But before we go down that road, I wanted to circle around. I got a question for you in regards to this labor situation. When you're talking about maybe the shop owners are not charging enough, per hour to the customer.
Right.
See, I don't know. I mean, I specialize in selling auto repair businesses, but I don't own an auto repair business. I'm going to talk to you from an outsider's perspective. When I go into a shop to get my car fixed, I don't know how many hours it's going to take somebody to do it. I'm just looking at my final bill. You know what I mean? So I'm not going, oh my gosh, that's they're charging me $150 an hour, or, oh my gosh, they're charging me $200 an hour. I'm more focused on how much my car costs to get fixed.
Can I afford
it? And labor and goods, that's it. That's all I'm focused on. So maybe they're making it more of a big deal in their mind than it should be. The business owner is. What do you think about that?
I do. I can't tell you how many times over the year, even before I was just kind of dabbling into consulting. When I was in Colorado, I owned a shop, and a friend of mine knew these 2 young guys, and they wanted me to go down there and see if I could help them out. So I talked to them a little bit. It turned out it was their mother that really wanted it because she was a big-time realtor and was tired of supporting their business, which was turning into a habit and not profit. So, and I talked to them, and time again, the concept was, oh, my customers won't pay that. Well, here's 2 things that used to be the immediate comeback. Well, then either you don't have the right customers or you don't know how to sell it. So let's figure it out. So one day I actually sat in there and I took some of the repairs and marked them up like they should be and called the customer and sold them. And it went pretty much as normal for me. And when I got off the phone, he goes, well, I can't do that. Well, you can. You got to stop saying you can't. There's a word when I can't. What is your concern? Well, they're going to say no. Well, these are three people you said are longtime customers. None of them said no to me. Yeah. So maybe we need to work on your phone technique, your sales pitch, if that's what you want to call it, and your sincerity. I says, why do you think we need to charge this much money for the repairs? He goes, well, we want to make more money. That's not, everybody wants to make more money. How about you want to be here if something goes wrong 6 months down the road to take care of them?
To me, I would rather just pay a little. I wouldn't mind paying a little extra to get my car fixed if I trust the shop and I know that I'm not going to come back and other things need to be fixed when they really don't. You know what I mean? It's like you build a relationship with that shop and you're like, okay, and I trust them. They're going to tell me what's wrong with my car. They're going to fix it. They're going to do a really good job on it. I'm not going to have to come back. It's going to be done when I drive away, and that they're not. I don't feel like they're trying to screw me by selling me things I don't need. Like to pay a little extra with that peace of mind. But maybe
and see that just takes some training and confidence that when you're talking to the customer, you're explaining. They were kind of a foreign repair shop. They were doing a lot of Toyotas and Hondas at the time, so they were doing tons of timing belts. And customers were coming in and going, "Hey, it's 60,000 miles. How much for a timing belt?" Well, he would quote them the labor and the price on the timing belt, $250 or something. And I would go, well, and then he was getting upset every time they pulled it apart. Well, an idler pulley was no good. This was no good. It needed a tensioner. The water pump was leaking. And he would get mad at the techs. And I talked to the tech one day and I said, what's with you two guys? He goes, I tell them all the time, take a look at one of my repair orders. So I did. I looked at it and I'm going, why aren't you selling all this stuff? And his comeback was, well, they're not going to buy it. They just want a timing belt. What good is that timing belt if the water pump's leaking? And it's right there. So it was a hard push to get him to sell a kit, which would have the belt and the tensioner and the water pump, all as a kit. And it's much more cost effective that way. But it triples the price. But you got to explain that. And I'm like you say, I'm sure if somebody said to you, hey, look, you're right, at 60,000 miles, you need a belt or whatever. But what we have found over time is that, and our tech is an ASE master tech. And every time we pull it apart just to replace the belt, we find out that a pulley's bad or the water pump is starting to leak, and they're all right there. So for hardly any additional labor, but more money in parts, this is the more comprehensive job that I can guarantee will last you another 60,000 miles. Would you like us to do that? The price is such and such. I can get going on that today and probably have it finished for you this afternoon. But they don't do that.
Honest with them. Yeah, all you're doing is being honest with your customer.
And that's all it is honesty.
If they say, nah, just do the one thing, I'm good with everything. Good, but all you're doing is informing them.
And okay, sir, but let me understand that on my repair, I'm going to mention that I mentioned that to you and you declined it. I said it won't affect our work at all, but I do have to mention that for our own good being. And I'll guarantee you, when you get to that point and you say that, another 50% of them change their mind in a heartbeat. Yeah. Because from an owner's perspective, looking at clients and customers, look, they're all looking for the best deal they can get. You can't blame anybody for that, but I know better. I'm the expert. And you need to portray that. So that may sound like a nasty thing to say, but that's giving that person another second to think, wow, maybe he's not kidding. Well, let me think about it and call you back. Okay, or whatever. But now you're getting them to think about what you just said, because the first thing they're hearing is, oh my God, it's another $400. You see what I'm saying? So that's where the confidence comes in, and knowing what you're trying to sell and why, and building value into it. So there's more to it than just saying, yeah, here's your belt.
Feeling trustworthy. Your customers
yes.
feeling that they trust your shop and what you guys
yeah.
are doing and saying. My shop I go to, yeah, if they tell me, it's going to cost a couple $100 extra because we need to do this, that, I'm okay with that. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
well, it needs to be done. They didn't know, and now they do, and I trust
Right.
them. I know I don't feel like they're getting one over on me. I
Right.
think that trust factor. But I want to get into Tony. I could talk to you for hours because I want to talk about the marketing and advertising. When we get done with that, I want to pick your brain on some things that I think our listeners would be really, really interested in. But I want to
Okay.
touch on that marketing and advertising because I promise that. Is there any insight or tips you can give the people? Obviously, we've talked about, you know, controlling your labor costs and controlling, making sure you're marking up your parts properly. But let's talk about top line, bringing the revenue in the door. Is there anything that you found to be a few things that you found to be extremely successful when it comes to getting customers in the door?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only do you have to maintain your customers, but you always need to be searching for new customers. So marketing to me is very essential. And that's another seriously overlooked um, thing that many shops just don't do for fear, expense, whatever the case may be. Um, as we progress into the digital age, a lot of stuff gets promoted out there as being cheaper and more effective than the old methods. But one of the things in every survey that I continue to read, not from the marketing people, but from the automotive industry, is that direct mail pieces still work and work well. They've always worked well for me, and they're easy uh, to to keep track of, if you will. You can either keep track of the services that you're bringing in off it, or you can have a different phone number they'll put on there that'll give you a chance. And then there's a learning experience from that because that allows you to listen to the phone calls. And for every shop owner out there who says, oh, Jim over there, he's the best, sometimes you ought to listen to some of the things they say on the phone. And you might find out with a little bit of an attitude adjustment and a pat on the back, he would be 30% better.
Real quick, Tony, real quick before we move on, the
Yeah.
postcards, you're finding that to be one of the most successful things for people to do, both for new customers, but also your existing customer base. Correct?
I have. I have my historical data. I didn't do it for 40 years, but I did it for the last 20 plus, and I have that historical data on cost versus profitability off them or return on investment, and those are percentages. And I have paid attention to the people I've been working with the last 4 to 6 years, and those numbers have they're still almost identical. So the cost of it's gone up a little bit, with the mail and all that, but the printing has actually gone down. And as far as a return on investment goes, it's still a great return. But getting into the digital stuff, if you can really hook into somebody that knows what they're doing, and that's the hardest part. But there's a thing called geofencing out there. I can't explain it to give enough sense to how it works, though I do know it works. You pick out your criteria, just like you would do when you're sending out a mail piece. I mean, I'm not just sending it to some zip code. I'm sending to a zip code with a lot of criteria, personal, income, how many cars, what kind of cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The years of the cars. You can pay for all this kind of information so that you're sending to the kind of client you want. If you're sending out a free oil change to anybody in the world, not to be, disrespectful, but if you're chasing bottom feeders, that's what you're getting. And they're here for the free oil change. What makes you think they can afford an auto repair? So, and many people do that. Yeah, I'm sending out these oil change coupons, but that's getting you nothing. I want to market to a professional, maybe a mom who's carting 3 kids to different sporting events every day of the week. That person needs their car. They need it to operate. And they may not be in a position to buy a new car every 2 years, so they're going to have to keep the old, mom's bus rolling. That's exactly right.
But they can afford to fix it.
There you go. So you got to market specifically for what you need and what you want, and then you have to take care of that customer. The geo marketing, the geo fencing thing will do that as well. The texting, sending text messages out now works really well because most people, I got way back when. I got sued when I tried that the first time because, you have to have all kinds of things. And the bottom line, it used to cost you money to respond to a text. I don't know if you recall that, but when that first started, every time you responded to a text, it was like 10 cents or 9 cents, and people would lose their mind over that. So I backed off that for quite a long time till they convinced me I could do it, without getting sued over it. And so that works out pretty well, but that works mostly for keeping your customers. Once you have them, they've given you all that information.
Yeah, because to me, I get a text message from a shop, an oil change place, and it says, "Oh, you're due for your oil change." I'm like,
right.
"Okay, that's great," and maybe book it right then and there. But
yes.
What I don't like getting on my cell phone is cold text messages to people. You know what I mean?
Correct.
Like if a shop sent me a text message to use their shop, and I've never been there, that's a big turnoff.
Of course, I agree.
Customer.
And that's why I say, so the marketing gets to be twofold again. Getting out and aggressively pursuing new customers by the mail piece and the geofencing and so on. That's one thing, but you want to retain your people too. I always used to make a joke, "You're in my computer now, I own you." And, most people would laugh. Someone thought we were nuts. But the bottom line is, you gave me your cell phone. You gave me your email address. And by the way, I have your mailing address too. So I have 3 different ways to constantly stay in touch. You come into my shop, and I don't care if it's your first service or your 100th service, you get a thank you note. If you had repairs that you did half and some of them you had to put off, that's fine. We put them in recommendations. In 3 weeks, I reminded you of those recommendations. And then I follow up in 6 weeks if you didn't take care of them. Following up could be done in a form of an email. It could be form of a mail piece. It could be in the form of text. Now, with some of the more advancements, when you make an appointment, a lot of times the text will verify your appointment. So there's all these things that you need to, I believe you should be able to keep up with that. A lot of the point of sale systems will allow you to do that. Here's another thing.
Automations. Most of what you said can become automations too.
They can be, but that's where you got to really pay attention to it. You got to pay attention to it, or else they'll do things that automating part of it will do things you don't want to do. So you have to be careful, and you have to make sure you have the right to keep approving everything instead of just doing it. I've seen things, even when I was still in the shop, where they would send things out and somebody would call me and go, "What'd you send me for? I just did this." Or text me for. And, you'd have to go back, "Why did you do this? Why don't you ask?"
Yeah, you got to set it up. It needs to be set up properly. But you're right. Even if you can check one last thing before a whole mass of emails or text messages go out, you check it and you sign off.
Yeah.
But the point is, you can do it much easier and quicker than you ever could before.
Absolutely.
Software and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So any other big marketing and advertising? Oh, you know what? You were talking about, having the contact information of your customers and how important that database is. Now you own it. Look, obviously we're living in a world where Google is a huge thing, and people, do searches on Google, and SEOing, doing SEO where the name of your shop shows up really high in Google. That's really, really important. But I do remind people at the end of the day that you don't own that. Google owns that. Google, like their algorithms can change overnight, and you can go from the number 1 position to the number 9 position overnight. Or, you never know. You don't have any control. Whereas when you have that database of customers in with your possession, with their name, the make and model and year of their car, their email address, their physical address, their phone number, that is gold. And that is your database, and you're not leaving up to Google. Now, I'm not saying don't go out and SEO your website and try to show.
No, you have to do all those things. You're right.
You have to do that, but I would put the database as a more important thing almost than anything else, because that's where you can go after those customers multiple different ways.
Yep, and that's the key. See, that's the thing, to always be able to, like you say, go after your existing customers, never give that up. That ability to reach out to them however many ways you can. And then the new customers, it's a different way of marketing. And, while we're talking about texting, we did a impromptu thing years before I got rid of my shop. one of the things we get when a lot of customers drop their cars off, and we get a phone number and maybe an email, and email is not as popular as it used to be, and you give them a call. Maybe you get their work number too. So we look at your car, and 9:30 in the morning, we've got an estimate. We trying to call, hey Jim, give me a call. I got an estimate for you here, and you got busy, and we can't get a hold of you. And it's now noon time. It's 1:00. We made 2 calls, 3 calls. Finally, you call back 3:00. Will my car be done today? Well, hell, we didn't even discuss what it need. We started texting people and got almost immediate responses, 15, 20 seconds. The first 2 times we did this, we sent them out. I didn't even have an estimate together yet. So I said, geez, let me call you back here. I said, so we learned that's just how the business has evolved, that texting now you can say, I could text you. You could be on the phone and say, hey, Jim, when you get a minute, but now you have it, and the minute you get off the phone, you call back. So those are the things that's not necessarily marketing per se, but that's shop flow. And that's just as important. You got to get them in here, but you got to get the flow going, or we'll have 7 cars.
That's your systems and processes, and that's a whole nother thing. Like we were talking about expenses on the financials, and then we were talking about marketing and advertising, and another big key component is creating the systems and procedures in your business so everything flows properly. And Tony, I would love to have you on again, and we could talk about something like that. I wanted to talk to you about that one last thing that I'm really excited to talk to you about, because I know we only have a few minutes. But I do want to bring you on maybe sometime we can talk about systems and procedures, because I'm a huge believer in that. Going back to that database and having that database, a lot of times buyers, that's what buyers are asking for when they're buying a business, an auto shop. How many customers do you have? What kind of information do you have about the customers? You got their physical address and their email address and their cell phone number and their name. You got the year, make, and model of their car. And like all that stuff is very valuable, and they're going to be asking you.
And historical data too. So you'll see when the last time they've been in.
Yeah,
and who comes in all the time.
Their average ticket is.
Yes.
The more information you can have, that is golden, very golden.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
So that's what I want to kind of talk to you about. I thought this would be a good transition, because you have bought a lot of repair shops over the years. You've sold repair shops. You've bought a shop or two, and you've sold a bunch of shops.
Well, actually, I've never bought my own shop. I've started every shop I had from the ground up.
Oh, okay. I apologize.
But I've sold them all. So same thing. I definitely sold them all.
Okay, so for people out there that own a shop and are thinking about possibly selling in a couple years, like what's the biggest piece of advice or two you could give them that
they need to
that's going to help them sell that business and maximize?
They need to get their books in order, and just like you say, their database in order. If they're not using a point of sale system and doing everything on a pad of paper or just some cheapo system just to print an RO with your logo on, that's just not going to cut it, because I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to believe anything you say because you can't back it up.
Yep.
And I think that's the most important thing.
For you to use that information too.
Sure. So, if I were to say, well, I'm doing 1.5 million a year and I'm grossing $900,000 and I can't show it, well, why would you believe me? What do they call that when you're buying your customers anyways? Blue sky. Well, now you're selling me financial blue sky. I mean, you can't have it both ways. You gotta have, to me, I always thought the sales of my businesses and the ones that I knew of people who sold went as smooth as they can. There's always going to be something, was because when they said something, they could push a button and prove it and back it up with checking account. A lot of shops, and maybe not so much, or maybe more today, I don't know, just putting the cash in your pocket and saying that's sales. Well, that's how you're going to prove any of that. And the same thing goes, if you tell me you have a strong business and X amount of customers, I want to see that somewhere, not on something you wrote down on a piece of paper. So those are all really cleaning up your data and cleaning up all your financials, to me, are the most important thing there is. There's nothing more important than that, because I want to believe you. I don't think anybody's a liar. But the fact of the matter is, you may not even be a liar. You just don't even realize where you're at. So you have to prove it.
You got to trust but verify.
That's
Trust, know,
there you go.
verify. They're gonna go under contract. They're gonna have the opportunity to do their due diligence, and you're
Right.
gonna want to know where your customers are coming from, how much they're spending, who your customers are. Not
Yep.
saying you give them the contact information of the
Right.
customers at that point, but they should have a general idea of. You're not gonna tell them John, Jane Doe at this address, but they should know how many you got, what kind of information you've got,
Right.
history, things like that. And then the financials, I think that's a huge one too. And I just want to touch that on a little bit is the financials have got to be clean and they've got to be organized. So if you're running a lot of personal expenses through your business and you're
Yeah, that's a
using your
problem.
business debit card or credit card as your personal debit card and credit card, and you're running all kinds of numbers through the business, buyers don't like that. Banks don't
No.
like that. It'll be really
No.
hard for a buyer to get a loan on that, and buyers don't want that. So if you're running personal expenses through the business, do not do that. And I say this all the time: is like for every dollar that you're trying to do that with, even if you're in the highest tax bracket, that's 37 cents on that dollar that you're saving. But when you go to sell your business, you could be losing out on $2, $3, $4,
Yeah,
$5.
I agree.
So bite that bullet with the taxes and keep your financials clean. If you're
Yeah.
2-3 years away from selling, you definitely should do it, but you should do it no matter what. And keep your
Yeah.
numbers organized, like you were talking about. You ask for a piece of information, they can push a button and they can get it to you.
Yeah. Start from the beginning that way, and then it just becomes rote, and you're just doing the right thing over and over again. You don't have to worry about stuff like that. That's seriously important. And I will admit, going back in the beginning, I was that guy. I was making money and paying for certain things out of the business, and and then I got a good accountant, 6-8 years in, going, "What the hell are you doing here? How am I supposed? If you ever want to sell this, how are they supposed to keep track? I can't keep track, and you can't keep track. So
That's the thing too. It's not even if you're going to sell like that. You're going to operate your business better if your financials make more sense instead of
yes,
burying things in there. And you
yeah,
can't tell what your gross profit is, what your cost of goods percentage is versus revenue, and what your labor is versus and what your net profit is. And it's harder to keep track when you're burying all that stuff in. So you're not going to sell. Just better from
you still got to
operations.
know, right? Exactly, and, and
Yeah.
and that's some of the things. Unfortunately, I think some of the younger people opening shops, they're a little better at that certainly than I was a long time ago. I kind of started in an era where guys are sticking money in bricks in the wall and stuff. But I mean, those days are gone, and you got to really pay attention to things. And but to me, those are the two main things right there. You can say that your guys are going to go with the new owner, but you can't guarantee that. I mean, I always tried to make a deal that they kept them on. But then the counter was always, well, will they stay? Well, hell, I guess so if you treat them right. I mean, I don't know, but
You
nothing
don't
can
cut the
change
pay.
on
You treat
perfect
them right. Just do
numbers and
some shit
data,
like that.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really important.
And Tony, you brought up a bunch there things at the very end there. I was just like, I'd love to talk about all those issues. Tony, you definitely. Before I say that, is there anything else you want to leave the audience with? Any last bit of advice or comment or anything?
Well, all I can say is that if you're a business owner and you don't love business, I think you're in the wrong thing. But if you do like fixing cars and you like business, man, that's the way to go, because business is the key. I think really learning about your business is the key. And that's the part I, in the end, really started to like more than anything else.
That's awesome. It kind of fell into me similarly 35 years ago. I was doing one thing and I became a business owner in that, and I fell in love with the business end more than what I
Yeah.
was doing. But that's a story for another day.
Then it makes it more
Business is
fun.
so much fun. Business is so much more fun once
They
you
can be.
start to understand things.
Yeah.
Tony, I do want to have you back because there's like so many different
Absolutely.
topics I want to talk to you about. So I appreciate you joining us today and sharing so much information. And I do going to have you back and have you share even more information. If you're watching this and you're getting anything out from this channel, please subscribe to make sure that you don't miss anything in the future. And love to hear your comments, or if you have any ideas on who you want me to interview in the future, please put a comment down below. I'd love to hear that. Thank you for joining us today, and have a fantastic day.